Thank you, Lindsay, and thank you for all for attending. So I'm going to pick up on something that Yebe started with at the beginning, which is the idea of the $20 billion a year we require, more, right? We require to reach universal access by 2030. But I'm going to use a slightly different matrix, yeah? That if we continue at the current level of financing that we've had, which is about 135, 140, whichever one you want to look at, million a year, it will take us about 1,000 years to reach universal access, right? So I think just keep that focus in your mind. So if we need to make a real change, then there has to be a real quantum change in the amount of financing coming into the sector. Otherwise, we're not going to forget the 2030. It'll be much longer. And I remember when I joined CCA, in my interview, one of the things I was told, saying, our job is to work ourselves out of a job. And I didn't know the clean cooking sector because I'm from finance. And then when I looked at the data, I thought to myself, I better strap in because it's going to be a very long journey. Yeah, I probably won't be here. So I'd rather not have that long journey. I think none of us would. So look, what's interesting as we've been kind of looking at the financing models, and Acumen and I think Yebe's conversation about public financing is interesting because the general theory has been that markets don't work, so you need a bit of public financing, you help a few of the companies to grow, become viable, and then commercial finance kicks in, right? And the world changes and you've got everything kind of working wonderfully well, right? But actually, if that was the case, we would have seen lots of changes happening in the clean cooking in the way, for example, as our friend from Spark Plus talked about microfinance. Things have changed in that area. So what's so uniquely different about clean cooking that we haven't seen in other sectors? So it feels like this is, in a model sense, is very different from perhaps the models that general development finance has approached over the years. But something really interesting is happening in the sector. And I think and we've all talked about it, carbon and so on, but I think that's something that's more profound than how do we get a bit of carbon finance in and so on. I think there is something which is so profoundly different that it might change the paradigm of development finance, and particularly finance in clean cooking in particular. Because one of the things that carbon has helped to demonstrate, and we've all said this over time, that there is more to clean cooking or many other development impacts or externalities we've talked about that is more valuable than just the transaction that we see, right? But what carbon has done is allowed us to commoditize that and monetize it. So suddenly all the values, that untapped value we thought existed, we're able to monetize it. So that's showing us a way of how we can unlock untapped value in a particular product like clean cooking fuels or applications, right? So, or look at it in a slightly different way. I think the study between World Bank and MEX and others who were there, let's look at the numbers. I think they said $2 billion of carbon emission cost to the world, $0.8 trillion in terms of women's time and loss of productivity, and 1.4 trillion in terms of health costs. Now reverse it. That's the imputed value that's being lost to the system. Can we actually unlock that value? So that market becomes massive, right? So what we're now seeing is that actually, even in terms of the growth of the clean cooking market, if we were able to visualize the growth of clean cooking companies that has not only revenues from sales, but revenues generated from unlocking these untapped values, so to speak, social value credits, then we have an opportunity to create really viable companies as a way of then crowding in additional finance in future. So that's, in a sense, where we think some of the kind of paradigm shift might be. And so what we have is a really interesting panel. I want to introduce, and we'll go through them individually. So we have Antonio from South Pole, who one of the biggest companies in carbon, and they will help us really understand how the carbon journey has taken place and what we can learn about unlocking that value for other benefits that might exist in clean cooking. We have Claudia, who has designed in amongst another company that we have, Sequest Capital, two of the companies who've been looking at how do you unlock finance for health and time, for example, right? Gender. Right? So, and then we have Mikkel, who is running the publicly funded results-based finance program. And what's the outcome we're buying? I mean, I know traditionally it's about adversing risk and paying for performance, but what we're actually buying is faster growth in markets, right? You're developing the markets to the grants that you provide, even though it's after results. And then we have Guillaume, who comes from the commercial banking sector and therefore brings in the kind of analysis that you would require as a banker into the carbon sector, again, looking at how do we crowd in other sorts of financing on the back of carbon finance. So hopefully this will be a lively discussion to see how all of these new forms of finance can be layered to make companies much more viable, and so that other forms of commercial finance like Spark Plus or Acumen can kind of come in and make companies grow and expand further. So with that, we're going to start. And I'm going to go and sit down, but as I go and sit down, I'm going to ask Antonio. Antonio, can you just tell a little bit about South Pole so that everyone understands, and tell us what's exciting you?
Well, let's add 2 words on South Pole. I can fairly say we are the biggest carbon asset management company in the world. At the moment, we are active in all the continents, and we have an ambitious strategy for Africa in particular, because we see a huge opportunity in the region. What's exciting about South Pole? Well, the fact we have a motto in South Pole: from ambition to action. So working for South Pole, yeah, well, I feel that after 12 years working in the carbon market, I'm in the position in which I can make an impact on not a regional level, but on a global level. What we do basically is bring climate finance when it's needed. So bring climate finance where climate mitigation action is happening. And once again, I think that since we are in Africa, I think that this is one of the regions where climate action is most needed, and where climate finance is most needed to finance that climate action.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think I'm fine on this. I want to ask Claudia, same question. Tell us a little bit about Cardano, and what's exciting you in this world of clean cooking and gender and health.
Thank you very much, Faisal. So a little bit about Cardano development. We're an incubator in risk mitigation solutions in frontier markets. And TCX was earlier mentioned. That was the first fund Cardano Development has set up.
Can you?
Sorry, is that better? Yeah.
So this is the problem with Dutch people being very tall. You have to also bend down.
And cold. Yeah. No, so Cardano Development is an incubator in frontier markets. We develop risk mitigation solutions, and we started with TCX, which was earlier mentioned, the currency exchange mitigation facility. And we're also the mother, let's say, of Bix Capital. What excites me is very much to announce that we've done an impact bond around health and gender impact in clean cooking, which has come to fruition this year. Where we were, I think, the first in the world to show that clean cooking generates 3 weeks of healthy life to women's life and 7 weeks of productive time, which of course was always anecdotally known, but no one has ever measured it, certified it, and transacted it. It's been a long road, this impact bond. We've got many partners in it, and I'd like to acknowledge a few of them. Shell Foundation, who's been our supporter from the get-go, MEX, IFC, also in the room here, and Osprey Foundation, who's the first buyer in this transaction. So they're actually buying the health and gender impact. And of course, Bix Capital, who's the investor, Sistema Bio, who's the cooking company at the heart of it. And yeah, thank you. Lovely
Very
to
good.
be on this panel.
Excellent. Thank you very much for coming. Mikhail, just same question to you before we get into deeper questions.
Thank you, Faisal. And first of all, I'm here on behalf of my colleague Ruchi Soni, who's actually managing our results-based financing facility. So I'm not going to take credit of managing it. And that's also the reason why the panel is a bit gender distorted. That's due to Ruchi not being here. Anyway, I work with Sustainable Energy for All. Sustainable Energy for All, which is a fairly small organization and was set up some 10 years ago with one objective in mind: to achieve SDG 7 by 2030. We work with governments, partners, private sector, civil society in doing so. We work across the SDG 7 agenda, but also recently have stepped up our work on clean cooking. And on clean cooking, there's really three things we do. Working with governments and partners in raising ambition, prioritizing clean cooking. Secondly, in helping reach those targets and those ambitions, we work now in a number of countries, including Nigeria, Malawi, Rwanda, on integrated energy access planning, not only looking at electrification, but also to include clean cooking in those plans. And then finally, we of course do that all with one objective in mind, and that's to unlock finance. And to walk the talk a bit, we, since 2 years now, launched the Universal Energy Facility at SC for All, which is really a multi-donor facility managed by SC for All. And that was launched some 2 years ago, initially focusing on 3 countries: Benin, Madagascar, Sierra Leone, and mini-grid connections. We're now expanding that to also include productive use of solar, and scratching our heads and figuring out what the third wave of the UEF could look like, and that would be for clean cooking. And while we do that, we're also figuring out how can we already make use of those mini-grid RBF scheme to retroactively perhaps a bit integrate clean cooking and e-cooking in that context.
Perfect.
So that's in short.
Thank you, Mikhail. So hopefully after this session, you might scratch your head a little less. Maybe.
Perfect.
Perhaps.
Look forward.
Guillaume, over to you.
Thank you, Faisal. We're South Pole, maybe the biggest carbon asset manager. I think we are the smallest. We basically invest our own money after 25 years of banking. So we have 2 activities. One is transform residues in Congo Basin. So mostly first transformation residues into pellets. And 6 years ago, we started to invest in afforestation and conservation project. And because these projects are, well, our point of view is that they are, the return is good enough, but the duration is very, very long. So we started to look into clean cooking. So we started to invest in IT, but due to the current situation, we kind of stopped for a while. And so we have 2 clean cooking activities, one which is actually running in Madagascar with NGO, which is our partner, and one we just started in Rwanda. So basically we are supposed to, during 2 years, we're going to distribute 50,000 fixed cook stoves.
Perfect.
50,000 fixed cook stoves.
50,000 fixed cook stoves.
Yeah.
Great. So thank you very much. I want to turn to Antonio first. So I think there's a lot of interest, obviously, in carbon. And the first question is this the kind of interest that we had when digital money came along, or is it the kind of interest that we had when cryptocurrency came along?
Yeah, let's start to say that certainly is not the way to mobilize the 25 billion needed to bring clean cooking at scale. But I think it's becoming a quite popular and important source of finance for scaling up clean cooking opportunities all around the world. I've started to work in the carbon market 12 years ago when carbon finance was just an ancillary way to make clean cooking project a little bit more sustainable. And for many years, we struggled a lot with the carbon price and with the demand. It was difficult to find clients. I would say that in the last 5 years, after the Paris Agreement was signed, and we call also that the Greta effect, no? We switched from a situation in which we were struggling to find clients in a situation in which we are struggling to find projects. So now we have the demand. The point is to fulfill that demand with new projects. Because the price, let's say, passed from $3 to $2 around 6 years ago to easily $10, $12 for clean cooking credits. So there is the opportunity there. There is the demand. Now we need to find the actual action on the ground. Because I think that particularly the voluntary carbon market can provide an important source of finance to scale up clean cooking projects.
And just to say, I mean, you interact with lots of buyers. Can you give us an indication of what do the buyers look like? Who are the kind of buyers? And what's the kind of money you're talking about? That's fine. Yeah. It's kind of just give us a sense of the scale.
Well, let's say that, always I feel I will be old in this market, but 10 years ago was really difficult to sell the history behind clean cooking. But little by little, we managed to find clients that they were interested into the history of what clean cooking, what kind of benefit clean cooking is bringing. Not only climate, but also social, health, environmental benefits connected to the clean cooking action. And we're seeing an increased number of buyers for all the sectors interested in this kind of project. Interested in the co-benefit, interested of the fact that, we support who is cooking, so women. From the oil and gas sector to the fashion, food sector, so a lot of buyers. The point is that, once again, we need to scale the offer of this project. There is a very interesting report for McKinsey that says the actual climate market needs to grow 15 times to fulfill the demand that we are going to have by 2035. So there is a huge opportunity. There are a lot of clients out there looking for clean cooking credits.
So, no, that's very interesting. Guillaume, I want to just turn to you. That if the traditional problem in the clean cooking market has been too many projects chasing too little money, which is not enough money flowing into it, what Antonio is saying, actually a lot of people are waiting to give the finance, but there's just not enough projects, right? What needs to happen on the supply side to get the supply to fill the demand that's available?
Well, for a company like us, I mean, there's no issue about the carbon prices. The return of most of the projects are good enough for people like us to invest, but depending on the risk in the country as well. But something we are missing is, even though that the cook stove activities in the carbon finance environment is the shortest duration, still you have to invest for between a year and 2 years max, where you are expecting to get the proceeds from the carbon sales. So this treasury, it's not a balance sheet, is limited with us, but I guess even at a different level for South Pole. So we would really need some kind of financing facility, and we can give away some collateral, precisely the carbon credits, in order to fill this gap between 1 and 2 years, and to be the equity investor for other projects.
No, that's interesting. And just to probe on this a bit more, which is, So that's still kind of addressing how sort of the financing can flow, which is the liquidity side. Are there things that on the supply side, so there are lots of companies here, are there things that these companies need to do in order to fulfill the large amounts of demand that's out there beyond the financing, pre-financing part?
I mean, to expand the projects, to increase the number of projects? Well, I mean, not all the projects are going to be attractive enough for people like us, neither South Pole. So you still need donors in some difficult part of the world because logistics is complicated and risk is complicated. But what I would really like to get is, for instance, an insurance that I could give as a security to a bank as well, because it's a complete neat story actually. I need to explain what is carbon finance to the bank first, and that's like Monte Everest by the North Face, and then I need to explain them that there's some kind of guarantee because there are going to be carbon credits. If I get a security, an insurance from a DFI or whatsoever, then it's a complete different game.
Perfect. No. So I think there's two issues here. One is how to get the pre-financing, the guarantee. Nishdeep is here. I don't know where she is. But oh, there you go. She's from the Africa Guarantee Fund. She's not on the panel, but we'll try and draw on you to see whether the guarantee, how that can sort of support that work. But the other issue I think kind of you're raising is how do you communicate that to... So what needs to happen early? So there's a minimum size that's required for you to kind of enter and other people to get support. So I want to just turn to Mikkel. On the RBF side, can you just say how you are helping companies to kind of get to a level of scale, then it starts becoming much more attractive to other investors and so on?
Let me maybe start off by describing a bit the landscape of the financial flows to the space. In setting up the resource-based financing facility at SE for All, we looked at a fairly rough study, what kind of money is flowing into this space in sub-Saharan Africa. And we found some 26 incentive programs focusing on output finance through RBF schemes or auction mechanisms for the off-grid sector. Out of those 26 programs, 21 countries benefited from them. And the overall amounts committed were 2.4 billion. What was quite interesting to see is that only 3 countries took the lion's share of that money. So in this case, according to our research, it was Nigeria, Ethiopia, and Tanzania got nearly 60% of that funding. Now, that's pretty much in line with what other research that we've done at SC for All, looking at the energizing, the finance flows going to energy access, where one, there's hardly any finance flowing to sub-Saharan Africa for electricity access for households. If there's little flowing for electricity access, there's nothing flowing for clean cooking a few years ago. And again, it's 1 or 2 countries that get it all. So there's a lot of countries left behind. Now, this is changing a bit now, and the RBFs, as we know, they're scaling up and increasing in numbers. And the encouraging thing is that clean cooking is now part of the equation too, given that there's more companies getting in the space, there's more business models, there's more traction altogether, as we see just looking at the room here and looking at the CCA forum. This is not what the clean cooking space looked like 2-3 years ago. But so, coming to your specific question, perhaps, what we've not been doing yet is to look at the clean cooking side of things. That's the thing that we still need to do. Yeah. What we did with the UEF, and where we're now seeing results, the first results coming from Madagascar, in fact, is through mini-grid connections, and that's just been looking at the connection. So you get $592 per connection, and that's the standardized scheme of things. And yeah, just recently, a few weeks ago, I think the first nearly 600 connections came live. 200 of those connections were female-headed households, and brought benefits to 2,300 people.
Okay. And so, can you just elaborate on, I mean, you do policy work and so on, which enables other investors to come in, whether it's carbon and so on, so there's very difficult for many investors to come to the country. Can you just explain a little bit about what you're doing at that level to make it easier for investors to come in? And then two, why is it that it's been so difficult to deploy RBFs to the clean cooking? Or how do you integrate clean cooking within the existing RBFs that you have?
No, indeed. I mean, clean cooking, being that orphan child from 5 years ago, now has a good family and a lot of friends, so that it's changing. But obviously, hasn't changed fast enough is that enabling environment or governments really prioritizing clean cooking. So what we want to do, and what we're working with a number of governments, and there's some great leadership from countries like Kenya, Sierra Leone, Malawi, Ghana in this space, is really to put clean cooking up there as a top priority. And then, obviously, putting in place the plans to achieve those targets with the necessary policies and regulations. So that's a space where we're working a lot with the partners on, to be able to attract those investments. And through our RBF, what we want to do is obviously in these markets to give that market boost, that market creation boost, that would then hopefully allow the markets and the homegrown solutions to grow as well and attract more finance altogether.
So just want to pick up, so, I mean, obviously there's a lot of carbon market out there. There are some constraints about getting financing and enabling an environment together, which some of the things that RBFs could potentially fill. We've also heard discussions from others that there is, well, actually, I want to just turn to you. There is this term, charismatic carbon credits. Can you explain? And then I want to just turn to, well, actually, I want to ask Claudia. Claudia, charismatic carbon credits, what are they? Just so that everyone understands.
So I don't think it's a strict definition, but they're basically carbon credits from projects that have a good story. So they're the cuddly carbon credits, and you could say they're the carbon credits with a lot of co-benefits. Often, you know, in energy access or health, gender, water, employment. Yeah.
And Antonio, you were saying, what's the premium on charismatic as opposed to just traditional sort of dull carbon?
Yeah, well, I would say that at the moment, 50% of the value of a credit depends on the co-benefits. Told you before about clean cooking, it's the fact that the history that you tell to the clients behind the project is the fact that you don't have only climate outcomes. You also, and more than that, you have a huge social and health benefit to the people using clean cooking devices.
So, just coming back to Claudia, so there is obviously a massive premium. It's one of the very few sectors where you have, something for the environment, something for health, something for, so it's quite a remarkable kind of sector, as it were, or kind of area. You've been developing the work around gender and health and so on. Can you just describe a little bit more about how that's connecting up with the carbon world and why you've chosen to create something that's completely separate, and where do you see the vision of that sort of evolving over time?
Yeah. So maybe first adding to the conversation on pre-financing, I just want to do a quick plug for Bix Capital here, who is actually pre-financing carbon offtake contracts. So, but about the health and gender impact. So what we were trying to do is really increase the pie. So, anecdotally, clean cooking is good for health and for women empowerment, but those are externalities, as you explained in the introduction. And so no one had actually tried to market them to the markets they who value that, and it's not necessarily a global market for health, because there's no such thing as a global health atmosphere like you've got for greenhouse gases. And the same is for gender. I mean, you can't offset domestic violence by buying gender credits, thank God. So it's regional markets, and the beneficiaries are, of course, initially the households themselves, but then also the local economy and the local health system. And at the moment, those are externalities, so no one is paying for them, but we thought, well, let's have a crack at trying to do that and show that value and bring buyers in who value that. So and the carbon comes in to it as well. So if you look at the certification side of it, the health and the gender are certified alongside carbon in the same certification program. So the gold standard for the global goals gives you the opportunity to certify contributions to any of the 17 SDGs, and Vista or Vera is doing the same. So these standards are giving you the opportunity to certify and then trade those impacts. And with health, it's very much analog to carbon, so you get your carbon credits in the registry, but you also get your dailies in the registry. So those are the avoided disability adjusted life years. So basically a good year of health added to someone's life. And so that includes morbidity and mortality. And these dailies are serial numbered, and you can trade them. And so they have a very different market from the carbon credits. So initially they used to be part of the halo of the charismatic carbon. But I think we're now at the cusp of them becoming a different market altogether.
And that will increase prices further as well.
Yeah, because if you look, well, of course, pricing is a very interesting topic, and we've had a go at it, but not necessarily, the final answer. I think it will be work in progress. So what we did with the health is we took one GDP per capita of the country where the impacts are produced, which is Kenya. And for the gender pricing, we looked at the living wage for Kenya compared with W plus credits. I don't know if people are aware, but there's also a gender standard which issues W plus units. And so we looked at the one transaction that had happened there, and we looked at GDP per capita as well. And out of that, those three references, we just came up with a price, basically, of $1 per hour of women's time freed up for productive work. So we had looked at time savings, and out of those time savings, we looked at how much is actually quality time. So how much of that saved time goes into productive activities, education, or rest and leisure. And the buyer, in the end, only pays for the quality time, not for the time savings per se. Yeah.
Fantastic. And Antonio, I just want to turn to something that I think a lot of people are talking about is how, I think Yeve mentioned this, how do you kind of connect the carbon and the public finance pieces that's there? How has that worked? Because there's some debate that carbon and public finance shouldn't kind of merge together, or there should be better accounting of it. So how does that, from a carbon provider, how does that work?
We have been working with public funds for many years. And I think, yes, that in some contests, the public funds are very important to establish a market. I mean, there are many contests in which there's no clean cooking, there are no producer, the logistics is difficult, there are political issues. So it's very difficult for private investors to arrive there. So in that case, public funds, they make a difference to establish a market. But of course, we're switching to a situation in which in some contests, I'm taking the big city, the big urban areas, the carbon component alone may justify the investment in clean cooking. The carbon component can represent, let's say, the subsidy that can be used to make clean cooking affordable in some contexts. But of course, it's ambitious what we want to do with climate finance, but alone, we are not in the position to bring clean cooking everywhere. So for sure, I mean, like 25 billion needed, that's something that we cannot match only with climate finance. So yes, I think that still public funds are very important, but I don't see a conflict with carbon. I mean, it's just different things. I don't see their different impacts. They are looking at different carbon. It's looking at climate outcome. That's it. Public funds, they work with different reasons behind. It's not only about mitigating climate impact, but also social, environmental, and development targets.
Right.
So it's.
So I just want to know, I think it's an important contribution we'll have to kind of feed in, because there's a fairly big debate around this and we need to be able to solve it at some point. That's a good insight to have. Sorry, Claudia?
Yeah, can I give some input? I think the public funds should really be designed well, in a sense that they don't, end up in windfall profits of certain companies, but that they're really targeted to the poorer strata of the global community, who will not be able to afford commercially these technologies in coming decade, basically. So it's in my mind very much a sense of very clever engineering of the public funds. So it's not just double counting or double paying for things double. It's actually addressing, the poorest.
Addressing
Yeah.
different sort of outcomes, as it
Yeah.
were. No. Do you mind you had a...
Yeah, just my experience in Madagascar, for instance. There was a donor with a program about the whole chain. So wood as biomass, and then the logistic, and then cook stove. Spent about $8 million US, and with a French NGO I know very well. And at the end of the day, it was supposed to be RBF, but not without the methodology of carbon, which is extremely formal. And after 8 years, no results, obviously. No supply chain, no production with same quality stove. So the good thing about having this carbon finance frame actually is it constrains you to be objective in your results. Where the donor, they give away the money for a certain period of time and then they leave. Where us as private investor, when it works, we keep investing. There's no reason why we're stopping it. It's sustainable by sense.
It does, yeah. If I may add, yeah, you're right. I mean, carbon does not stop when the stove is on the ground. If you need to get out of the project climate outcomes, you need to monitor the project. You need that project to work in time. So perhaps climate finance provide a little bit longer framework to the investment and the project than public funds. But since there's also, if I may, we are in a situation in which I'm quite sure that a lot of public and private funds are coming to the market. But we also need to be in the position to implement projects, because that is the key. I don't think that suddenly bringing on the market billion to invest in clean cooking would solve the problem, because there is not the capacity at the moment, I think, to bring clean cooking everywhere.
Right. So that's interesting, and maybe an issue of sequencing as well, because I think generally RBFs are around, I don't know, it's 2 years, 3 year cycles, and then it finishes. Is that 3 years, 4 years per investment? Yeah, babe?
Yeah, so RBF can be structured based on the output,
Sure.
outcome, and income. The income can take longer time.
It could be longer, okay.
Here is that the output will provide you more quicker incentives.
Okay.
So
All right.
that would be like 1 year.
Okay. So, yeah, so there are some 15 minutes. Okay, thank you. Short term as well. I just want to finish with one, I mean, this could carry on for ages, but one question to Guillaume. Article 6, and there's sort of NDAs that, NDCs that, sorry, that, I have contracts in my mind, NDAs, NDCs. So how do you see that playing out? So that the NDC commitments, Article 6, and the way the voluntary carbon markets have been evolving. What are the risks and opportunities do you see of that sort of evolving?
That's a tricky question. That's a risk we need to assess now when we invest in a country. So more and more we will go directly to the authorities and ask for a side letter. So they are aware of the project and they are not going to try to change the law retroactively. The thing is, for the cooks of project, I find it difficult. So they claim the carbon credits coming from clean cooking activities, but for nature-based projects, there's a big issue, and we talked about it before that. I mean, if the country decide to that the carbon credits nature-based are theirs actually, it kills private initiative. So we need to have a talk with them.
So I think just some key points. I mean, obviously there's a quantum of money that's available. We know that exists. The market has changed with many more buyers chasing very few projects and suppliers. So, and I think the story was that if we could try and get some guarantees and securities to allow pre-financing to happen, that will solve one part of the problem. You also talked about capacity. That's a real problem. There's not enough absorptive capacity. So clean cooking companies need to be stronger so that they can absorb the money that is available and they can grow with talent and expertise. I think we talked about potential sequencing of complementarity between RBFs as a sort of a starter perhaps, and then carbon coming in or coexisting at the same time. There are some tensions around sort of issues of public funding and carbon finance and health finance, and although there are different outcomes they're buying, so you could still do the same thing and buy different outcomes.
Yeah.
To have more money coming into the sector. There's no particular problem with that, possibly from the market side. And on the health side, there's, it's not just carbon. One of the great things is that all the benefits, Cooper and Caitlin from Social Finance who were here, was very interesting. We were putting together a concept around for COP, and we were saying what's very interesting about carbon credits is that the benefits of carbon accrue globally, but the benefits of health accrue to households. And combining these two pieces together make a proposition that's so much stronger than just purely a global environmental sort of agenda, as it were. So that's really, really interesting. But one of the risks I think we need to have a think about very carefully, where I think NDA, NDCs, and Article 6 might push governments to say, okay, anything that's generated in terms of carbon is ours, which might frustrate potential sort of private sector investment in the country. So there needs to be some arrangement of how that sharing might happen over time, and certainly no changes in policies halfway through after it starts. You had a point?
It's very complex. I think the discussion on Article 6 and NDC is very complex at the moment. No one has an answer.
No.
No one.
No.
No, I think it's important to mention that because of the whole, slow process of the Paris Agreement and the implementation mechanisms underneath it, the voluntary market basically stepped in that gap, and the private sector has just gone ahead and did things, and so they now shouldn't be sort of penalized because they did actually move. So let's please, accommodate the private sector and boost them going forward. But obviously, given that we're in a international atmosphere, and we've got the Paris Agreement, and so the voluntary market will have to be integrated in some way at some point.
I think, we'll have to find a kind of a sweet coexistence spot which satisfies the requirements of governments as well as satisfies the requirements of companies. So I know we can probably speak a lot more, we can speak more, but I think what I'd like to do is get a couple of questions first, and then we have a few questions that we want to ask the audience as well to get your views, and then we'll wrap up. So let me just take one question there, and then one question there, and one question there. So 3 questions. Yeah, so please go ahead. No, I'm looking at you. Blue shirt, blue blouse, I should say. give the mic to, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. The supply and demand issue, not enough projects, right? We hear that all the time. Can you be more specific? Because I think what you mean is not enough big projects.
Okay.
Can
So
you quantify maybe in units, what is the minimum size for a carbon project to be viable? Or in units, what is the minimum size for a climate bond to be viable? Or in number of units, what is an investment to be viable from your point of view? Because all of you are investors, and the problem is that we are repeating the same problem, ticket size.
yeah. So just in the interest of time, I'm not going to share it with everybody. So on the health, if Claudia can kind of answer,
Yeah.
and if on the carbon, well, I think I will have to go to Guillaume as well, because different size of companies have different appetites. So, I think let's start with Guillaume. What's your minimum ticket size before you get out of bed?
Well, I had this question just before, actually. Less than 10,000
right?
cook stoves is too small, actually, because there's a same amount of money you are going to spend for certification, whichever it's a very small project or a huge project. So below 10,000 cook stoves that are going to be distributed, it's not worth the certification. So that's my point of view, but Antonio.
Well, I think they're very linked. I mean, like, the problem is the same. Certain size is needed for both health and climate benefit to make. I mean, like, the certification process and looking for clients and so on is a costly process.
That's
so
the fixed cost that you have to get back anyway. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and I think in particular for health, gender is a little bit less complex, but for health, the current methodology is costly to implement. So, and
sorry, I think it's important to give some numbers to it, right?
yeah.
So how much does it cost? What is that cost structure? Yeah. So what does it cost to certify a health?
Well, we've got
I think it's important to put data behind these
I'm
things,
looking
right?
at Kiyoshi Okumura from IFC. I don't think I'm allowed
to say. Okay, all
to
right. Okay,
disclose.
all right.
But and we've got a sample of one. So obviously we were dreadfully expensive doing this for the first time. But yeah, prohibitively expensive at the moment, I'd say. But definitely lots of opportunities to bring transaction costs down. And with our initiative, we're actively scaling up and making things replicable. So we're bringing out the SDG Impact Purchase Agreement, so the equivalent of the ERPA, out there for everyone to use. And also our registration under the gold standard will be publicly available, so other companies can use them. So there's lots of tools and templates which we'll bring out for others to come and have lower transaction costs, but the actual monitoring of exposure of cooks is still quite expensive, but there is local labs opening up, and we're working hopefully with the gold standard to improve the methodology to bring the transaction costs down. Right. But I think one response is also important, in terms of the size of a carbon project or a cook stove project in order to do health and gender. I think you need the cleanest technology, so it's not for every cook stove project, because the health benefits only accrue if you're really clean, extremely clean. So you're talking about more advanced technology, so it would be forced air, cook stoves, ethanol, electric cooking, biogas, those kind of technologies. So it's tier 4.
Okay, so so I think the health thing is a slightly different issue because you're at the early stage, so the fixed costs are much higher, but just carbon has become a lot more, so you've scaled. I think just give us a sense of the fixed cost for certification.
Let's not take the labor cost, which is the nightmare, and the monitoring cost, because of course but I would say that certification costs around 30,000-50,000.
Right.
That is for a medium-sized project, but let's not only consider the minimum side of the project, because what we're looking at when we invest in Clean Cook It, I guess it's the same for everyone, it's can we contribute to scale the project in a way that, of course, we can monitor it and generate output. Even if a partner comes to us with 200 stoves, by discussing, we understand that we can scale that project to a certain level, we are interested. Of course, there's no way. It's a small one, just a small area.
So I think just to kind of say, I think there is minimum levels vary. So it'll be depending on your balance sheet and your depth of your pockets, right? So at the side, some people will say 10,000, some people say we'll start with 0. It doesn't matter, yeah? We want to see sort of private sector motive, your ability to scale, the talent you have. So there's a whole range of things people assess, right?
Let's say that, yeah, I agree. Perhaps also in some cases in urban area a little bit less than 10,000, but it doesn't worth less than 5,000 stoves to have a carbon project.
So, Faisal, maybe can I say something about...
Actually, just in the interest of time, no. But I'm just going to be kind of... so, yeah, it's because we've got a couple of other kind of questions. So let's just say 5,000, right? But I think the other way of dealing with this is that if we can dramatically reduce the cost of certification, cost of monitoring, and then actually the minimum value of output goes down, yeah? So there is we've got to work towards how do we reduce those costs so that the minimum ticket sizes become sort of more attractive. The second, is that what we're going to say? Right?
No,
okay,
I just wanted to say...
Just hold it for a minute. So we had a second question. Where was it? Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
My name is Zijun Li. I'm energy specialist with World Bank SMAP. So first, congratulations. It's really good to see the pilot transaction is materialized. And actually, I just want to mention that World Bank is also completing a co-benefit study, which Yabe and me, we are leading. So we are planning to publish the results in the coming months, actually. So the aim, the objective of that study is really to replicate the carbon finance incentive scheme to other important co-benefits like health and gender. At the same time, we also try to quantify and measure the impact level results, which are like oftentimes more challenging and difficult than output and outcome level measurement. So one of the key findings from the study actually is that there are synergies across these standalone methodologies like ALDALI and the time use and black carbon to reduce the fuel cost, like the measurement cost. So that is, I think this is a very interesting finding that might be like encouraging the private sector to participate. So my question to Claudia and the other panelists is that, so with this proven streamlined monitoring and measurement procedure in place, and also the solid evidence-based data from the field study, the survey, so what are the additional steps you see that to replicate and scale up the impact transaction like the one Kandana is doing? Yeah, so I'll pause here.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think you've answered that already, right?
No, well...
All right, go on.
Thank you. No, thank you very much for mentioning the World Bank study, because I think we're working very much in parallel towards the same end. And I wanted to mention, you know, in terms of quantum, because I think that's important, if you look at carbon, health and gender, how much value is coming out of those three. And health and gender surpass probably the carbon value. So they are very significant. I'd say health would be 1.5 times the value of carbon credits, and gender probably closer to 2.5. So there is significant additional value that can be monetized, and which would give an enormous boost to cooking companies, and particularly if it's designed in such a way that it will include the poorest target populations, I think can be very, very constructive. So what needs to be done? Well, we need to get our results out and get them in front of the right people in the health sector and the gender sector, to show that you know, introducing clean cooking is a very effective and very cost-effective health, preventative health measure, and a very effective measure to work towards gender equality. So convening the right donors, I think, is the next step.
All right. So I think just in the interest of time, I think a lot of progress has been made. I want to just thank the panel, first of all. They deserve a round of applause from everyone. Should be seen as a start of a conversation. Certainly from the Alliance, we want to create this conversation, continue this conversation around carbon, health, gender, and time to move this agenda forward, working together with the World Bank, Sequest Capital, BICS, and others who are really kind of key players in this sector, and of course, the key players in the carbon market. It's very clear the money's there. Supply has to change. There's roles for everybody. Development partners can help develop capacity. RBF could come in at an early stage, kind of, particularly on the output ones, to create some conditions, the minimum scale required for carbon to kind of come forward. There are interesting guarantee facilities out there, including through Cardano and all the DFIs. They have guarantee facilities to see how the pre-financing could take place. So there's real opportunities to make this grow. And then other commercial, larger pools of funding is existing in commercial markets, both domestically in developing countries as well as internationally as well. So I think for us, we should really see these new forms of financing just dramatically scaling the available finance for clean cooking. And that could really scale so that we don't have to wait 1,000 years to achieve universal access, but we can achieve, Marcel, 500? 100? Yes.
8 years.
So thank you very much with that for your patience and to the panel. Thank you.